And our goal has basically been to kind of, by the time these bills leave our committee, have a single comprehensive framework for how AI is going to be regulated in California. And then, once we've heard a bill, it goes to the Senate, and healthcare AI bills will go to the Health Committee. Public safety AI bills will go to the Public Safety Committee. So there's no longer that possibility of, across committees making sure there's consistency in definitions or, a lack of redundancy across bills. By the time things get to the governor's desk, if they make it to the governor's desk, we want to have a single consolidated framework for AI. So the committees, in terms of staff, unelected members of the committees, it's me and two other people. And the three of us kind of broadly split up the committee's work into privacy, consumer protection, and AI. So this year I did a lot of the AI work for the committee. And it's been a super interesting year. So I'll pitch CCST quickly, the California Council on Science and Technology. This is, as you mentioned, an organization that brings PhD level scientists into California and embeds them into various parts of government. So I ended up on the legislative side. Other members of my class ended up on the administrative side, working in the agencies. But really a phenomenal opportunity to kind of directly get involved with the process at a really personal level. And now this year is up and I'll be going and doing something else. Remains to be seen exactly what that is, but it's been a phenomenal opportunity this year to really engage with the policy at this level. So to broadly summarize how I see California's approach to AI legislation this year, I think there's really two global types of bills that have been introduced. One type are bills that attempt to broadly regulate artificial intelligence, to basically say, regardless of your use case, if you are a developer who constructs a model or who trains a model or who embeds a model into a system, we want you to be abiding by these principles. So that's one type of bill. It's a much harder type of bill to write, and it's a hard type of bill to get correct at the committee level. There's another type of bill which basically says, here's a very specific issue that we would like to address when it comes to AI. One example of this is the issue of CSAM, or child pornography. It turns out that AI-generated CSAM is actually not illegal under current law because it's treated more like a drawing. So the police came to certain legislators at the beginning of the year and basically said, we keep finding folks with terabytes and terabytes of these materials, and we can't charge them with anything because they haven't actually, there's no victim. This is not a real person that's being visualized here. What do we do? And so one of the bills we saw this year, it's now actually been split into two bills, AB 1831 and SB 1381, expands existing law just very, very slightly to now cover artificial intelligence generated materials in a way that they previously didn't. So that's an example of it. Someone comes in, a legislator comes in with an idea of a very specific issue they want to solve. On the other hand, you have bills like Senator Scott Wiener's SB 1047, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, that says, if you are going to train a model that's 10 times as big as any model that exists right now, and also it has to cost you $100 million, you have to generate a SSP, a safety and security policy, I think that stands for. You have to abide by it, and you have to get an auditor to sign off on the fact that you've done that. And then you're complying with this bill if you've done those three things. Another bill, my chair, Rebecca Bauer-Cahan's AB 2930, is a similar kind of safety bill. It asks for risk assessments to be performed for not generative AI, but predictive AI. If predictive AI is used to inform a consequential decision that's made in the healthcare space, if an ADT is being used to generate a rate for your home insurance. So this laundry list of kind of consequential decisions that really affect your life, but may have an automated decision tool somewhere in the process. Basically the bill says, if you're a developer of that tool, we want you to test it for bias. And if you're a deployer of that tool, fill in any gaps that the developer didn't test for your specific use case. And once you've done that, please also notify the person who's subject to that automated decision that an automated decision tool is being used. And that is independent of the specific issue. It's a bill that's meant to broadly regulate this space. So that's kind of how I see the breakdown of bills this year. as well as a little bit of background on how the legislature actually functions and kind of how these bills become law. It's just like Schoolhouse Rock, where the long week waiting in committee is kind of where we are in this process, editing the bills and making sure they're kind of fit to be passed off to the next step in the process. And if you have a bill that is both a tech bill and a public safety bill, multiple committees can see it. So that's kind of broadly how the process works.
So if we bring it up to the present then, what happens is the bills that are successful emerge from the legislature. They go to the governor's desk, and the governor has until September 30 to sign them. So either they're signed into law or they're dead for that year. So I think last week maybe at Dreamforce.
I'll actually correct that just a little bit. In California, we have a pocket signature. So if he takes no action, the bills automatically become law. And that's unlike the federal government where it's a pocket veto.
So he actually has to explicitly veto.
He has to explicitly go on the record vetoing a bill.
Okay, thanks for clarifying that.
Of course.
So a lot rests with the governor right now because some bills didn't make it through and others did. Last week at Dreamforce here, he signed 3 bills last week. I think 2 were announced at Dreamforce. So what were the bills that he actually signed? There was one having to do with media, another with elections.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so he signed about 5. So I think of the 50-plus bills that were initially introduced, I think close to 20 made it to his desk at the end of the process. Some of them were consolidated, some of them were killed along the way in various committees or on the floor. And he signed 5 last week. 3 of them were related to election disinformation. And those basically broke down into bills that bar social media from hosting disinformation-related materials in a specified time period around elections, as well as bills requiring labeling of AI-generated content related to elections. And there were 3 bills of kind of that vein. And then the other 2 bills related to these digital replicas. So these are bills related to, for example, should a major motion picture association, for example, be able to, without consent, train an artificial intelligence using the life's work of a deceased actor and generate movies that appear to have that actor in it, but in reality are just AI generated. And this bill basically says you can't do that without consent anymore. And there was one bill that does it for, basically expands protections for living actors, one bill that expands protections for deceased actors.
I'm sure that they're very appreciative of that.
I think
they're a state for
so. Certainly their families are.
So what he has not signed yet, I don't believe, is AB 1047, this Wiener bill, which has gotten national and global attention, which is the one that actually does aim to regulate these large language models. And when he was speaking at Dreamforce, he didn't address it specifically, but he expressed a concern about California competitiveness and not wanting to get in the way of the competitiveness of AI companies as they grow in California. So that may be an implicit suggestion that maybe he'll veto it, but what do you think is the outlook for 1047?
Oh, I would be speculating just as much as any of you, unfortunately. What I can say is we, as the Privacy and Consumer Protection Committee, we in our chair put a tremendous amount of work into making that bill both as comprehensible as it could be and also as I think light touch as any bill in that space could ever hope to be. Our fear, at least at a staff level, I can't speak for my chair on this, but our fear is that the longer you leave this space completely unregulated, the more likely it is that eventually there's going to be a major headline-grabbing harm that occurs, or just massive damages on the order of what this bill covers is $500 million or more in damages or mass casualty events. And the bills that are going to emerge in response to that event, and that will be undoubtedly signed by whoever's the governor when it happens, are going to be kind of reactionary probably, and not as well thought out as what we can come up with now. We can lock something in that is both protective and kind of allows the industry to flourish, which everyone wants, without being kind of unduly burdensome or reactionary. And so that was our goal as a committee. at least at the staff level going into this. As far as whether or not it's going to get a signature, who knows?
Yeah, everybody's watching that one, and it's interesting too because there's been a lot of opposition from industry, but interestingly also a lot of political opposition from within the governor's own party, the Democratic Party. So Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker Emerita of the House of Representatives, urged her to veto, but she came out against the bill. Ro Khanna, who is a very techie member of Congress from Silicon Valley, came out to oppose the bill. And there's been sort of both a lot of sort of pretty powerful political opposition from within the region as well as business opposition. A lot of it going back to what we were talking about just a moment ago, kind of concern that if you don't do this very, very well, you potentially kind of stifle innovation and economic growth, which is what everybody here needs right now, especially in San Francisco. So there are a lot of eyes on this. Because people look at the AI Act in Europe, and they say, well, there's that over there. And what do we think about what they're doing there? Is that something we would want to model ourselves on or not? But I think that it's a reference point, but it's, there's a California way of doing things, and that seems to be what people are thinking. But within the committee discussion or yours, was there much reference to the EU AI Act or not?
I think that our goal all along as a committee, and this is apparent in one of my chair's bills, AB 2885, which provides a definition for AI in statute, our goal is really to have some level of consistency across major global markets. And so when we develop this definition of artificial intelligence that we hope, or my chair I believe hopes will be signed and will appear in statute from here on, we wanted a definition that would allow any given product that is characterized as artificial intelligence and therefore subject to the EU AI Act in Europe it has exactly the same classification as an AI product in California. So you're not just dealing with this endless patchwork regulation. Yeah. When it comes to 1047 and just our thought process more broadly, I think our goal is to promote alignment across markets, but there's a first mover problem, right? And California is a place where a lot of this legislation, I think this is my personal opinion, but the states are meant to be kind of laboratories for democracy on this front. And I know that Scott Wiener put a lot of time and thought into that bill and brought a lot of stakeholders in to talk about it. And as did we met with various members of industry and members of representatives from from Congress in California, and tried to come up with something that was at least satisfactory to everyone at the end of the day. Whether or not we got there, I guess we'll find out from the government.
We'll find out. Yeah, the only other thing I might mention in the California context is, there's legislation in the legislature, but there's also executive branch policy coming from the governor. So about this time last year, the governor came out with an executive order regarding the use of AI within state government for state agencies and state employees. And maybe a really high-level summary, if I have it correctly, would be that it recognizes the challenges and the risks, and it creates a mechanism within different state agencies, because they're regulating different things, for each of them to kind of manage within their area of responsibility the risk that comes up with overall support from the governor's office and the state. But basically, it encourages agencies to accelerate the adoption of AI as rapidly as possible. It provides for training of state employees and how to use it, including how to manage the risk side of it. And then they're setting up a number of pilots, often with private companies like Nvidia, and now with some of the big large language models, to, for example, accelerate training in AI across the state. So the first big pilot with Nvidia, a collaboration, public-private, to train, I think, 100,000 people in AI skills through our community college system, which is basically 2-year programs. So I think we're seeing, from the governor's office, maybe it's a different role, I guess, but a different approach is being essentially proactive not blind to the risk, but more proactive on AI. And then I think a somewhat different angle from the legislature, which it would be ideal, of course, if those were harmonized at some point too.
Yeah, so I'll just mention a couple of bills briefly because I can't speak to the governor's approach, but two bills that have kind of directly interfaced with that or have attempted to directly interface with that are SB 892 from Senator Padilla, which would require the Department of Technology to create a procurement standard for automated decision systems. So basically, similar to my chair's AB 2930, kind of require the department to test for bias or to have a minimum level of bias-free standards that these tools have to meet in order to be acquired by the state. That bill, I believe, has been vetoed now. And then the other one is SB 896, which would codify some aspects of the governor's executive order, which, as you mentioned in your opening, executive orders are kind of as good as the governor who oversees them, and with a change in administration can come a reversal or a immediate halting of any executive orders that were initiated by the previous administration. So this AB 896 from Senator Dodd would I should say, because I think it's still pending a signature, codify some aspects of the governor's executive order.
Okay. There's one thing everybody doesn't want is to have hundreds of different bills across the United States and discrepancies within different governments in the state and across the United States in the absence of any kind of federal standards, where companies would have to deal with just a myriad of different regulations. And so I think that's maybe one goal that everybody has. So we have time for some conversation. So why don't we just open it up to any questions that you all might have.
Myself right here. All right. So first of all, thanks. I think there's a lot of details that even for us living here a long time, we kind of missed. So it's great to have actually this conversation, how this process works, in particular for things that have a real impact in everybody that is actually here attending. My question was more on, in particular under the AI framework, what do you think that might be the bills that would move from California to federal, so or other states would implement? Do you have any sense of what of that can be, kind of a guideline for the rest of the country, as it often happens?
So of the bills that I mentioned, kind of the two categories that they fit into, there's the bills that broadly regulate AI and the bills that try to address very specific issues. The bills that address very specific issues tend to have to fit into the existing language of the law. So for these CSAM materials I mentioned, this is a bill that, these bills very specifically go in and alter the penal code to make it compatible, to expand it to include artificial intelligence generated materials. And that's a very California specific approach. The concept is something that could be adopted everywhere, and I'm sure is being adopted everywhere. But as far as California's specific penal code, there's no way to just take that bill and slot it into a different state without adjusting it for that state's penal code. On the other hand, you have bills like 1047. One bill I'll mention that has gotten a signature is Senator Becker's Senate Bill 942, which requires for generative AI systems, the developers of generative AI systems, they have to, one, embed some level of provenance data into their into the images, videos, audio that their systems create, such that a third-party observer could infer that it was created by the developer's AI system. And two, they have to release a tool that actually lets a third party do that, basically to upload an image and say, was it or was it not created by your system? And that's an example of a bill where the entire text of the bill is kind of just, de novo. It doesn't fit cleanly or amend any specific existing part of the law. And so you really could imagine someone taking that and saying, this seems like a good model for if we have developers that are based in our state of generative AI systems, and we're worried about, deepfake materials used for scamming or for election interference or for CSAM, maybe we can do something similar here. So it really depends on a bill by bill basis, but that's a good example. 1047 is a good example. And then my chair's bill, AB 2930, related to automated decision systems, last year was AB 331. And while it didn't make it through the process last year, actually Colorado passed a very similar bill that was based on the text of that bill. And so they were then the first in the nation to pass a law beginning to regulate automated decision systems and their uses in consequential decisions in the lives of, in that case, Coloradans, but maybe in the future we'll have something similar for Californians. So, and like you mentioned at the beginning, California is really frequently looked at as setting the example for the rest of the nation, and I think I don't think tech will be any different.
Yes.
So first of all, thank you for this panel. I was a student of science and technology policy myself, so I found this really, really interesting. And the first takeaway I bring home is that in some way in United States, you have fragmented regulation and a unified market, whereas in Europe, we have exactly the opposite. So unified regulation and fragmented market. The question I think it's interesting to ask to a person doing your job is, how do you rate the EU approach to regulation in general, or specifically in AI sector?
Do you want to take a first crack at this?
I'll just make one comment. You'd probably have more to say, but I think this may not be fair entirely, but there's a broad perception here that by its nature, the European Commission, the European Union, leans heavily and early toward regulation, sort of the precautionary approach to technology that would kind of look first at the risks and set up a fairly fully articulated structure, which is very protective of a variety of public interests, but that very often is perceived to be, or believed to be, burdensome and potentially inhibiting innovation and the competitiveness of companies that need to use these technologies. So there's a perception that, rightly or wrongly, that that's the approach the EU has taken with the AI Act. Whereas, in the US, it's been, well, we don't have any national legislation, so we're at the other end of that spectrum. But I think the general approach has been to try as far as possible not to preemptively regulate or to really modulate how far you go down the precautionary road in order to preserve the opportunity for innovation as far as possible. So basically, don't stifle the innovation, because that's where the new company is going to come from, the new growth, and all of those good things. So I think we kind of err a little bit on the let's help to accelerate innovation every way we can, within reason, as opposed to let's make sure everybody's protected. So there's a little bit of a difference in emphasis between generically how we approach these things in the U.S. and California than in Europe, despite having a lot of concerns in common.
Yeah, and all I'll add on to that is that it's really apples and oranges. I think in California first of all, nothing's happening in Congress. So California, I think legislators, my impression is that they do feel like they have an obligation to act. California is the world's 5th largest economy, if it were a country. And so they feel like what they do here matters. And then we also have this system where you have 120 legislators all kind of mostly independently introducing legislation. And so, whereas the EU can kind of take a very slow, measured, careful, step-by-step deliberative approach at crafting a full framework for how to regulate all AI, we in committee land are put in a position where we have to hammer together these disparate pieces of these disparate bills into something resembling, the most comprehensive and the most effective framework we can, without it contradicting itself and without it, really trampling on, I think, values that we all here care about. So the systems are so different and the approaches are so different that I think only time will tell which is going to be the more effective of the two.
Hi there, Thomas Lee from Darapi. Actually, one comment to build off of that. I think so a little background on me. I also got into this space through a science policy fellowship as well. So,
You're a AAAS?
yes, IEEE USA. So, but part of that same program. To your comment about differences between the US and the EU, one thing that is very different, I think, is the interaction between the implementing agencies and the legislatures. There's much tighter coupling in the EU, in Europe, than there is here. In fact, at least on the federal level, there's actually an explicit prohibition of the agencies interacting with the legislatures, except through specific individuals. So you have a lot less coordination there. My question for those, one of the things about regulation, oftentimes is proactive regulation, is that you don't always understand the risks, right? And so that's the concern sometimes I have around regulating AI, is that we're so early, right? So how would you characterize our understanding of the risks, right now, and do you think the regulatory approach or the regulatory efforts are sort of coming at the right time, or are we sort of worrying about things that we don't fully understand yet?
Are you talking about the risks of over-regulating to the various affected industries? Or are you talking about the risk that AI potentially poses to Californians? What do you have in mind?
Well, more the latter, and then the implications on the former, right? Because that's the balance between like regulation that enhances or protects and one that inhibits innovation, right?
Yeah, I don't think we have a perfect sense of exactly how these risks are going to manifest in the real world yet, but I think at a broad level, it's clear what the categories of risk are going to be. So for example, if you have an LLM that's been fine-tuned in such a way that it can quickly and easily give you access to, bomb-making instructions, or, I'm a wet lab scientist originally, and with the right set of instructions, you could imagine a wet lab scientist being able to recreate a very virulent, virus, basically, airborne rabies or whatever it is. That's a pretty well-established risk, even if we don't know exactly what form it's going to appear in. That being said, and I think that you can make you come up with similar examples across. The risk of an old person falling for a scam because a chatbot is on the other end trying to extract information from them, or the risk of social engineering granting access to someone's database. I think when it comes to regulating AI this year, our approach has not been to call out those specific risks, and I should really say the legislators' approach has not been to call out specific risks. It's been really to ask companies to do a self-assessment and say, your system better than anyone else. 1047, for example, says, why don't you develop a safety and security protocol that's up to snuff, that's kind of in line with emerging industry standards, and then assess your system based on that safety and security protocol. And if you think that it's kind of safe to be released, and an auditor who's just verifying that you have tested your system in compliance with your own safety and security protocol agrees, you're good to go. And so I think this non-prescriptive approach is at least how the legislature's been tackling things so far this year. SB 942 is another example of this watermarking bill that I call a watermarking bill, but really it just says, find a way to embed provenance information. It doesn't say use C2PA specifically. It doesn't say find a way to watermark the image. It just says embed this information somehow, and in such a way that it allows a third party to extract it down the line. And so far, we'll have to see how all this turns out, but that's the approach that has been taken up to this point. Yeah.
Time for one more.
If there are no questions, since I already have the mic, I can go ahead and ask a question. Actually, along the lines of what he just asked, I was wondering also, thinking about the EU policy and how, one of the metric is the flops, and this flops, the metric that's been established kind of allows the further development of EU models. I was thinking, like, from the regulation standpoint, how do you balance this paradox between regulation and at the same time the need for innovation? How do you balance this two needs, let's say?
I think it's tricky. I think most of these legislators have Silicon Valley really foremost in their mind, and an unwillingness to do to push legislation that they feel would stifle Silicon Valley. So I'll say that first. That's been my experience in the committee this year. And just the other thing I'll say, because it's not really my my area of expertise, is that I do feel that with smart regulations that are informed by interactions with the industries that are being regulated, you can actually set guidelines that, for example, make the average everyday Californian more comfortable interacting with these systems. They can go into these interactions, they can purchase products and engage with businesses, feeling like they're protected in some way. So I'll leave it at that. Do you have any thoughts on?
No, I think you're right. That I think the idea, there's enough popular concern just among general people about AI that I think a lot of legislators feel, well, they should be responsive to that. So there's definitely interest in the legislature, but I think, especially being California, that I think there's a recognition that so much of our prosperity and growth, especially in this part of the state, has come from technology and technological innovation, that people don't want to get in its way any more than necessary. So, and I kind of think about the governor's approach when he was doing his executive order, where they were pretty explicit, like talking to us, like, we don't want to come out with some fully baked, whole-blown policy because we know things are moving fast, they're going to change. We don't understand it as well as we'd like to now, and it's going to keep moving out ahead of us. So we're going to develop this in an iterative way and do it in conversation with industry and others, including the legislature. So we can adapt and respond as the circumstances change. So that's, I think, been the general approach.
Yeah, I agree.